have this recollection of a description that you once gave of standing watching ambulances pass you, you know, which were facilities for white South Africans, you know, that were not available to the black patients you were treating, who were indigent and underprivileged, basically, lacking those resources. What was that like? I mean, that feeling of injustice, were all those events just crystallizing that?
It's when you feel that level of injustice, it's very easy to fight back. And I, you know, because we were working in Alexandra Township, we had very, very few facilities. We were delivering women on newspaper. We had very few facilities. We would wait for a long time for an ambulance. And then we would have the indignity often of driving past what was then the Johannesburg Hospital, the white Johannesburg Hospital, all the way through to Baragwanath. And because I was running the pediatrics there, we would often have desperately ill children, desperately ill babies. And on many occasions, I absolutely insisted that we stopped at the Johannesburg Hospital and would shout and scream in the accident and emergency and demand that these babies, these children, were at least resuscitated. We had no equipment in the ambulances to do this, so at least they could be resuscitated. When you see that level of injustice, when you've got a child's life in front of you, you don't hesitate. You know, who would hesitate but to say, you are going to actually save this child? You know, I don't care about what you're saying to me. You are going to save the child. You know, and then we'll take it from there.
On a personal note, I mean, you were also part of a mixed race couple at this point in apartheid South Africa. Was there a frightening aspect of that to your marriage?
Interestingly, I don't recall ever being frightened. I mean, we were prosecuted under the Group Areas Act. We were evicted from houses. There were many occasions where, you know, one or other of us would hide. Somebody would hide away. We'd deny this, deny that, do a bit of juggling. Kids couldn't go to the local, you know, couldn't go to schools. They were thrown out of parks because they were the wrong colours. I mean, there was a lot of that direct experience. And yes, we did get particularly singled out in some instances because of this peculiarity in those days of being a mixed race couple.
I understand you've got an interesting story to tell about how you worked around the housing situation and Bram Fischer's daughter and the role she played in that.
Oh, yes. So we eventually had to move a lot because of the Group Areas Act. So we moved when we first arrived, and we had a Yusuf, who was our eldest child, was, you know, a toddler. You know, children don't need much, you know, they just need a bit of love and some food, and they'll come with you anywhere. So we moved about 8 times, and eventually we bought a small house in Mayfair. And the day before we were going to move in, I bought it under my name, because Mayfair, although it was becoming a grey area, was still officially white. Under Group Areas, it was white. There were a lot of people of different races then moving into Mayfair. So I'd put it in my name. The day before, I had a phone call from the PERM, which was the Building Society, telling me that I wasn't allowed to buy the house because actually technically I wasn't white. So they cancelled the whole bond. And then, so what we did was we did something that people were increasingly doing. That was in the 80s. So a friend, Ilse Wilson, who's Bram Fischer's daughter, she became our nominee. So she officially bought the house for us. And so she was actually my landlady. And the Group Areas police then said to her, you have to evict them. We'll give you 6 months to evict them because they're the wrong race. So even after that, you know, this whole scenario just rolled on a bit.
When you think back on these stories, are you surprised that you never landed in jail?
I mean, we nearly did on a few occasions. I mean, we had, you know, high-speed car chases with the special branch after us through Joburg and, you know, at Alex and so on. I guess we were lucky because many of our friends and colleagues did land in jail. So I think that we were fortunate, but probably came that close.
Prof, I want to move into post-democracy. I mean, your career's broadened into many areas since then: HIV, TB prevention. How did you manage the decade of AIDS denialism in this country?
I think that was really, you know, that was extremely tough. And I was appointed by Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma as, first of all, to sit on the Medicines Control Council when, you know, immediately after 94 they were trying to sort of broaden the membership of all of these statutory bodies. And then later on I became the chair. And then Dr. Mantu Shabalala Misiman came in. And then all of the stresses about antiretrovirals really came into being, and we had some very difficult times. through the MCC on the one hand, but also in the research world as well, trying to do things around HIV in the context of denialism. It was stressful, very stressful.
You must have worked closely with Manto Chabalala and Msimang. Did the two of you butt heads?
We did. We did, and we butted heads on, particularly on issues such as registration of antiretrovirals. We certainly did, yes.
How do you feel about the about turn South Africa has made in our HIV policy?
It was absolutely necessary. It totally had to happen. It was a matter of time, because the AIDS denialism era was so incorrect. It was incorrect from a factual point of view, from an evidence base, and from an ethical and moral perspective, that this really had to change. What I think has really excited people is the difference now with a health minister who not only said, I want to do things differently, but made this a priority. So he, from the outset of his first term of office, said, I want to test people, I want to treat people, I want to stop transmission to infants. It has changed the context in which we work, and it has made South Africa in many ways very successful in the way it's addressing HIV, but nowhere near defeating it, and nowhere near defeating TB. So while we have made enormous strides particularly in the last 5-6 years, we have got the same kinds of strides to make again to really finally overcome what HIV continues to do to our society.
Prof, you've also put a great deal of your energy into women's reproductive rights. And a few days ago we learned that 90,000 women had abortions in the last year. 60% of these are teenagers. When we look at a figure like this, does it really speak of the empowerment of young women, or does it reflect an existing powerlessness in our society of these particular women?
If we want to fundamentally change the fabric of South African society, we need to say, how do we change the gender relationships and the opportunities for young women in a very fundamental way? How do we do that? Because gender isn't only about young women claiming the space, it's also about young men and older men claiming a different space. So certainly I think that those figures, the abortion figures, but also the teenage pregnancy figures, the HIV figures, are all telling us that young women don't have enough knowledge yet, don't have enough access to services, are not sufficiently empowered to negotiate things, and that we have to do something different in the context of their not only education in schools, but in terms of the whole community orientation around gender.
You've also worked very hard to live out this dream that you and your colleagues have shared over the years of Africa's people getting access to the vaccines they need. Is that an ongoing goal of yours?
Yes. I mean, particularly in the last 10 years, I've worked extensively with WHO on the question of immunization and vaccines, and particularly for the African region, but also globally. Vaccines are one of the fundamental building bricks of health promotion and prevention. It's one of the best tools we've got at keeping particularly children healthy. It's changed the face of illness in children. But we're still not getting the vaccines to probably the children who need them the most. And these would be poor, vulnerable children whose families don't have access, who are in vulnerable areas and so on. We forget in comfortable areas that measles kills children, that polio kills children, that many of these diseases that in a middle-class environment you might not see, and you might not see killing, but if you're not in that environment, if you're not vaccinated, you remain very, very vulnerable. It's an area where I would like to see much more work, and it's an area of my focus. I think in life, when things are tough, you can either throw your hands up and say, this is too tough for me and I'm turning the other way, or you throw your hands up and you say, this is a challenge and I'm here for the journey.
News that moves. eNCA.com.